Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I didn't expect that. And because I did not foresee this, my life as a happily married man ended after 22 years, 5 months, 6 days, and a few hours. And all because I wanted to order a fucking pizza, and I was too lazy to go to the kitchen to take my phone off the charger. Surprisingly, my wife's phone was on the nightstand at the other end of our sofa. I say amazing because it's a rare case when this thing isn't in her hand or tucked into her pocket, especially in the last few months when she left the room to text, let alone talk. I heard the shower running upstairs, which seemed strange to me for a late Saturday afternoon, but I didn't pay attention to it, taking her phone to make a takeaway order at our favorite pizzeria. We didn't discuss any plans for the evening, and since nothing was cooking in the kitchen, it usually meant pizza for me and ordering primavera pasta for her. But when I pressed the return button on my phone to log in, the damn thing asked me for my password. I must admit, I looked at the phone as if it had just cursed me and squeezed it tightly in retaliation. Fuck you, iPhone, I thought, and immediately began to wonder what the hell the password was. And just as I started to wonder, a more important thought came to my mind about why it was blocked. We've had the same iPhones for years, and neither of us has ever blocked them before. The last time I used her phone was probably 8 months ago to check the weather, and then it wasn't blocked. I am a professional in computers and phones, so I took the password request as a challenge. After a moment's thought, I entered the last 4 digits of her social security number, knowing that this was the combination she had set up for our home safe, where all our important papers were stored, such as birth certificates and passports. The phone immediately unlocked, showing the SMS screen. I noticed that her best friend, Jen Jefferson, was at the very top of the list, which meant that Tracy had written her the last message before going to the shower. I probably shouldn't have looked at the message list, knowing that it was a violation of her privacy rights, but then again, she's my wife, so I didn't think it would matter so much if I just looked there to find out what she and Jen were texting about. Can the price of an expensive pair of shoes be so personal? A life-changing event. The pain that I suddenly felt in my chest would have knocked me down if I had been standing. I began to suck in air like a man being strangled. Everything went upside down. I wasn't sure if I had lost consciousness, but when I came back to myself, I realized that there were tears in my eyes and I couldn't concentrate. Suffice it to say that I found out why my wife is in the shower, and that the events planned for the evening with a certain Neville were not their first meeting. I read the entire conversation and had already started scrolling through the list to see if there were any others when I heard that the shower had stopped. So I exited the app, locked the phone, and put it back in its original place. Feeling as if someone had just hit me in the stomach with a baseball bat, I sat down on my edge of the couch and stared into nothingness. After a while, Tracy came downstairs and went into the living room. She was dressed beautifully, but not too exquisitely. A nice touch, I thought to myself. I was glad I didn't jump up and start strangling her to death. I decided to see what it would lead to. Hey, baby, I'm going to meet Jen and the girls tonight. You don't mind, do you? What is it? She asked, and innocence literally oozed out of every word she said. I watched her carefully as she moved around the room. If she felt any guilt, I definitely didn't see her. I don't mind, honey. I'm just going to order myself a pizza tonight and relax watching the Twins play against the Rangers, I replied, keeping my voice as neutral as I could. 2 people could play the acting game. By the way, you look good. I've always liked that blue dress you're wearing. Maybe I should go with you to discourage all the guys from thinking the wrong thing? I said. She didn't realize that I noticed how she winced slightly at my words. I knew the last thing she wanted tonight was for my bland ass to be around. I really love him, Jen, but he's so bland, she wrote earlier to her friend. Neville is something else. Just thinking about him makes me wet. She took the phone from the bedside table and headed for the exit, probably so that I would not have time to fulfill my threat to go with her. I knew that she would meet Neville at the Red Lion for dinner, and then they would go to his apartment for a few hours of carnal pleasures. I wasn't seriously going to go with her, but before the end of the evening, this insipid guy should definitely show up. Knowing that I needed to kill time somehow, I leaned back on the couch and reminisced about my marriage. Not so long ago, I would have called our marriage perfect. I had no idea that Tracy thought I was boring in bed and was unhappy with my performance. I always made sure that she never went hungry, and judging by her screams, I couldn't be too boring in bed. I had a lot of questions in my head, and not the least of them was the question of how long this affair had been going on. We have been married for 22 years, and I immediately realized that we were not going to have a quarter of a century. I am a certified public accountant by profession and probably also by nature. I am an analyst and calm, not prone to flights of fancy or anger, which perhaps explains why my wife finds me insipid. However, considering that we've been married for so long and raised 2 children, she's convinced that I can be passionate both in life and in the bedroom. I was confused and offended, and my anger began to glow like in a stone furnace. I knew that my wife and her lover had booked a table for 6 in the evening, so I drove into the back parking lot of the Red Lion at 7 to watch the door. My plan was to follow them to Neville's house, as I have no idea who he is other than his name. I remembered the first time I saw the woman who would become my wife. She was making ice cream at a Sunday event at my church, and I, like several other guys, immediately became attracted to this curvaceous brunette with green eyes. I had to fight my way through several other young guys that day to get a chance to talk to her, but the wait was worth it. Besides being beautiful, she is smart and speaks the language well. I wrote down her name and phone number that day, but I didn't call her for 2 weeks. I decided that this would give all the applicants time to get out of my way. The relationship started relatively quickly. We dated for 8 months before I asked her to marry me. 8 months after that, we got married. 2 years after that, our son Larry was born, and 18 months later, our daughter Delilah was born. Both children were already in college, which, looking back, could have been the beginning of the end of my marriage. I noticed that Tracy seemed to pull away from me a little, but when I tried to tell her about it, she said that I was paranoid. Paranoia? Your name is Daniel. I was shocked when Tracy left the restaurant around 7:20, followed by a tall, fit young guy who looked 20 years younger than her 47. I didn't have any expectations about what her lover would look like, but I certainly didn't expect to see a damn baby. I think he's handsome, although I don't think I know much about males. He has a shock of curly brown hair. He looks about 14 kilograms heavier and 7.5 centimeters taller than me. I saw them kiss before getting into his car and driving away. I followed them at a decent distance, knowing that the last thing they expected was for me to follow them, of course, in my bland car. After 15 minutes of driving, they stopped in front of an apartment building and entered the building, and the bastard took my wife there, hugging her around the waist. A minute later, I saw the lights go on in the apartment on the 3rd floor. Considering that I knew they had done this at least a few times, I didn't feel the need to rush there instantly. I wanted to give them a chance to start and then stop it. I waited for about 15 minutes, getting more and more filled with anger by the minute, before I came to the door of the apartment, which I assumed belonged to Neville. This was confirmed when my wife screamed loudly for more. What the hell? I'm in the hallway and I can hear her screaming, while at home she acts like she's in a fucking church. My incessant knocking on the door finally produced a result. Neville, wrapped in a bathrobe, opened the door, looking not too happy. There were 2 of us, and I hit the big bastard right in the nose, causing him to stagger back and blood gushed from his face, and the second blow hit him right in the chest. I burst into the apartment past the prostrate bastard and rushed to where I thought the bedroom was, finding my obviously naked wife cowering under the sheets. She heard our brief exchange, but she didn't know exactly what happened or who was standing outside the door, so when I appeared in the bedroom doorway, her eyes became big like an owl's. She opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. "Don't come home. You don't live with me anymore," I shouted, drool flying from my mouth. "Call me back in a few days and I'll let you come in and get your stuff." Finally, she found her voice and answered as I turned to leave. No, wait, it's not," she began, but then suddenly stopped. "I guess so, but we need to talk. No one has ever said more truthful words, but now is not the time or the place." The boy lover stretched out on the floor and moaned, burying his face in his hands, when I was about to pass by. Still on 100% adrenaline, I kicked his unprotected sternum, hearing how, according to my assumptions, ribs were breaking, walked through the door of his apartment without closing it behind me, got into the car, and drove home. I guess the rage and surprise on my part did me good, because the last time I fought with someone was in the 6th grade, and then I got my ass kicked. Neville was considerably bigger than me, but I don't think it took me more than 10 seconds to get him on his back. Not bad for a bland guy, I thought as I drove the car into the garage. Still in a bit of a frenzy, I grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels from my wine cabinet and poured 3 fingers into an ordinary water glass, and then began to pace around the house, smashing several Tracy's trinkets, hurling them against the nearest wall. Then I grabbed my favorite knife from the bedroom table and stabbed it into our wedding photo hanging on the bedroom wall. I could have done more damage, but the doorbell brought me back to reality. I can't say that I was surprised when 2 policemen appeared on the doorstep. I opened the door and invited them in. The first officer waved back at me, then, putting his hand on the gun, went inside, followed by the second officer, who also had his hand on the gun. I watched as they both carefully examined the debris that I had left on the walls and floor from the broken trinkets. The police said they were here in response to a complaint from one Neville Douglas. It turned out that Mr. Douglas was attacked in his apartment. His nose and 2 ribs were broken. Although Neville didn't know who attacked him, the woman who was with him in the apartment confirmed to the cops that it was me, her husband. I thought it was very nice of the police not to call me her cuckold husband. We understand that you were completely right to beat him unconscious, but we cannot allow every abandoned husband to take revenge with his fists, the first officer told me. He wants you arrested and charged. Okay, I understand, but for the record, I didn't hit him. I only hit him twice, I said quietly, hoping that if I told the truth, my punishment would be commuted. Both officers looked me up and down, and then seemed impressed. It looks like Mr. Douglas just fell for the wrong woman's husband, the second officer remarked. I silently agreed to go with the officers after they said that I had a few minutes to complete some personal business on the computer. While they were watching me closely, I transferred half of our checking and savings accounts to an account in my name only, and then paid off and closed our 2 joint credit cards. It's a pity that I didn't do this from the very beginning, when I caught my wife cheating, the first officer said. It took almost a year before the court forced her to return my share to me. I had to live with my parents to somehow survive. Well, if I'm not mistaken in my assumptions, then I won't have to worry about living conditions for a while, I grinned. Probably, the lover did not like that a bland old man brushed his face. I saw both officers exchange glances upon hearing my cryptic statement. I didn't feel it necessary to tell them about the joke, whatever it was. I was at a complete loss when Tracy challenged the divorce I filed while in prison. I was going to be incarcerated for quite a long time, so I decided that this would be the perfect solution for Tracy. I love you, Dan. I have some feelings for Neville, but I don't love him the way I love you, Tracy said, visiting me in prison. How can you say you love me when you've been cheating on me for, I don't know how long? I asked. You like Neville? The very thought of meeting him makes you wet. And I'm just ordinary. You don't like me anymore. I'm just here. As what? Your backup option? I watched as several emotions flashed across her face, the most dominant of which was shock. She had no idea that I had seen her phone, so she was confused when I told her the version of the text message conversation with her best friend Jen that I had seen. I didn't plan this, Dan. It just happened that way. He is my colleague and friend. He's a very nice guy. I think you would have gotten along if you had met under different circumstances. It was probably a good thing there was a table between us. Otherwise, I could have tried to squeeze the shit out of her. I made a face and growled. How long has it been, Trace? Were there others? I growled through my teeth. About 8 months, I think. Neville is the only one, she replied. I felt so old and out of place when the kids left. He breathed new life into me. You and I are the same as before. The same. He was something new, and he's full of energy, and I like it. I like him. But that doesn't mean I still don't love you. I love you, and very much. I don't want to get divorced, Dan. It makes absolutely no sense to me. You can't have both a husband and a lover at the same time. That's not how marriage works, Tracy. At least our marriage. So now you're going to be in jail for a while, she interjected. Why don't you just postpone the divorce until you get out of here? Think about it. Nothing should change while you're in prison. We'll be able to make important decisions when you get out. Why did you beat him up so badly, Dan? I didn't hit him. Why does everyone say that? The bland guy only hit him twice, I argued. Only twice? He's much bigger than you, and younger, and healthier, she said. Rage is a great equalizer, baby. And a surprise. The bastard fell down like a sack of shit. She pursed her lips and exhaled heavily through her nose. It was obvious that she was thinking hard. How did you find out about us? What is it? She asked. I thought we were so careful. Are you really asking me that question? I growled. She refused to sign the divorce papers, knowing that I would not go anywhere for several years. 6 months later, I learned from my son, who came to visit, that she had let Neville live in our house. On the same day, I got into a fight in the prison library and sent another prisoner to the infirmary, earning a month of solitary confinement. He's not such a bad guy, Dad, and he doesn't let Mom feel lonely, Eric said. If he's not such a bad guy, then why am I here and he's sleeping with that cheater you call your mother? I asked rather sharply. Technically, we're still married. I wanted to get a divorce. She refused to sign the statement. So you think it's okay if she lives with her lover? Eric made a face, then got up and finished his visit. My children alternated visits, coming once a month. 6 months later, my daughter, Sherry, accidentally dropped another bomb on me, mentioning how cute her mom looks with a growing belly. What the fuck did you just say, Cher? I interrupted, while she chatted incessantly. About what, Dad? What is it? She asked. About your mom's growing belly? Sherry's mouth opened and she blushed. Oh, I shouldn't have said anything about it. Can we just pretend that I didn't say anything? What is it? She asked. Baby, maybe you just handed me the keys to the kingdom, I commented. Start talking. 5 minutes later, I found out that Tracy was 3 months pregnant with Neville's baby. It seems she didn't take birth control pills that regularly after I went to prison, and even after Neville moved in with her. 5 minutes after that, I was on the phone with my lawyer. The judge in our case did not want to give me a divorce while I was in prison because Tracy was categorically against it. But now that Tracy was pregnant with someone else's child, he changed his position and agreed to divorce on my terms, in the absence of Tracy's signature. My lawyer also obtained an order prohibiting my name from being entered on the birth certificate of Tracy's child. Needless to say, she was unhappy, and I didn't care about her happiness. The gate opened and I walked out, being free for the first time in 778 days. I still had almost 3 years of probation left for my 5-year sentence for third-degree assault, but if I didn't screw up big time, I'd never come back. I chuckled to myself, realizing that a few weeks ago I had not been completely honest with the parole board. I told them that I sincerely regret my actions that landed me in prison, and I will do everything possible to never repeat this mistake. In fact, the only thing I regretted was being arrested, because if I had been given the chance to do it again, I would have done the same thing in an instant, and maybe even worse. My lawyer was waiting for me outside the gate. We shook hands, got into his car, and he drove me to my new home, to a one-room apartment on the other side of the city where I lived when my life as I knew it was ruined. I returned to the scene of the crime, so to speak, against my will. I just decided that it would be easier for an ex-prisoner to find a job here, where people know why I spent time in prison, and it would be easier for me to find a job than to explain all this to someone who didn't know me. This strategy worked well. 2 days later, I got a job at Wilkie Outdoor Concepts, an earth-moving and landscaping company, perhaps because its owner is also an ex-convict. Anyway, it's a paid job, and I was happy to get it. The biggest flaw in my strategy was that I knew that one day I would run into my bitch ex-wife or her lover and the baby daddy. It's going to be hard for me to hold back, and I really didn't want to go back to prison and serve my sentence. I ran my fingers over the scar from my right eyebrow to the middle of my cheek, about 7.5 centimeters. It is a constant physical reminder of the worst part of my life and that I was able to survive it. 3 years before that, I had the whole world by the balls, or so it seemed to me. I've had a loving wife for 22 years now, my soulmate, 2 wonderful kids in college, a good job, and a great home. All this was before I found out that my wife had been cheating on me for several months with a much younger and bigger man, who helped her get through the feeling of old age and uselessness after our children left home for college. I advise you, children, no matter how tempting it may be, never hit your wife's lover. I felt great at that moment, but it cost me more than 2 years in prison. By the way, I broke his nose and 2 ribs. My job was designed mainly for 3 seasons. There were layoffs in winter. But when I had a job, I earned well, so if I was unemployed, if I made a careful budget, I could easily make ends meet. I probably could have gone back to working as an accountant, hiding in the back room of someone's company, but I really liked the physical landscaping work, as well as the fact that it didn't require much thought. In fact, this is almost the exact opposite of my previous work experience. After 3 years of working outside, my skin darkened and took on a rougher appearance. I gained about 9 kilograms of muscle while losing some fat. Towards the age of 50, I was probably in the best physical shape of my entire life, with noticeable abs and more massive muscles in my arms, chest, and back. My once neatly trimmed dark brown hair had turned into a shock of shoulder-length curls, which I sometimes pulled into a ponytail on windy days to see better. I even pampered myself and got a tattoo on my left forearm. The word blandness, written in cursive and measuring about 13 centimeters in length. She served as a reminder that I needed to be less of a nice guy and take more responsibility for my life, even if sometimes it made others unhappy. I will never forget how my ex-wife accused me in her message to a friend, telling me that her lover is not as nice a guy as me, but just takes what he wants and how much it turns her on. I decided to be that kind of guy for the rest of my life, but I still didn't have the courage to write "fuck you" on my hand. Blandness was supposed to serve my purpose. I got the tattoo about a year after I got out of prison. In 2 years, I had to explain its meaning about 24 times. "You're Dan Washburn, Tracy's ex-husband, aren't you?" said a very beautiful voice to my left as I sat at the bar in DeVito's place, a quiet bar 15 minutes from my apartment, on Thursday evening. There were important people at DeVito's and I wasn't, so it was a good reason for me to chat while I was watching football on Thursday night and drinking beer. Although I didn't know her that well, I recognized the woman with the beautiful voice as Jen Jefferson, my ex-wife's best friend and, yes, the very Jen Jefferson. To some extent, I blamed her for helping to ruin my marriage, although in fact I understood that in her text with Tracy she did not encourage or hinder her friend's affair. Nevertheless, it was a good old idea to shoot the messenger, because it was from these texts that I learned about Tracy's infidelity. "Yes, it's me," I replied to a tall, thin, pretty woman. What gave me away? A tattoo on my forearm or on my forehead? "The lighting probably isn't very good here, but I can't see anything on your forehead," she said seriously, while her eyes searched me. "If you look closely, the word is written there, schmuck." I thought I had a great marriage. She thought otherwise, I said with a slight smile in my voice. "You look good, January. To what do I owe this pleasure? Do you want to poke me in the nose about my ex-wife's infidelity, or tell me that I was a fool to divorce her?" I asked. I watched Jen's face turn from a smile to a grimace, and then frankly ran my gaze over her body. She was wearing a dark blue sundress with a floral print and straps that ended about 10 centimeters above her knees and showed off her tan skin. She was about the same age as me, and I would have to admit that she took good care of herself. I would do it if the opportunity presented itself. "I can spin in front of you if you want," she said with a slight playfulness in her voice. "Good. Let's see where this leads." I raised my index finger and made a motion to make her spin. She did it with a smile on her face. The sundress lifted slightly at the same time, which caused a smile on my face. "Nice. Very beautiful legs," I said, imagining how they would look hugging my body. She frowned slightly, and for a second I wondered if she was reading my mind. "I understand that I was mostly Tracy's friend, and you and I didn't know each other very well, but I'd like to come in and see how you're doing. I know the last few years haven't been the best for you," she explained. "I'm fine now. It took some time, but almost everyone in the city helped me a lot. By this point, everyone already knows the whole story, and I've received a lot of support. No one treats me like a criminal. Well, an ex-criminal," I said. For the record, I didn't condone Tracy's affair. I knew about him, but I didn't condone him. I thought it was wrong, but you always seemed like a decent person to me. I told her that before starting a relationship, she should have divorced you. But she continued to insist that she loves you, and if you never find out about her affair, then it won't hurt you. We argued about it because my ex cheated on me before I divorced him. "Have you ever thought about telling me?" I asked. She blushed deeply and lowered her eyes. No, she whispered. She was my friend, and I only knew you a little bit. I think you can say that I was faithful to the smallest detail. Jen was at the bar with a couple of friends who were also single. She invited me to join them at a table, and I agreed. The other women, Mary Jo and Ellie, were also friends of my ex. We spent the evening having a pleasant conversation. The only taboo topics were my divorce and my ex. I really like your new look, Jen said at one point in the evening. Very much. Not bland? I interjected. Definitely not bland, Jen said, running her finger over the tattoo on my forearm. But you know, for some of us, being bland isn't necessarily a bad thing. For some of us, this means that you are a good guy. And good guys don't always finish last, if you understand me. She blushed slightly, and her friends smiled back. At some point, all three women dialed their numbers on my phone. Mary Jo started by brazenly asking if she could give me her number, and the others tried to keep up. 2 days later, I called Jen to arrange a date. She suggested that, for the sake of fairness, I should also call Mary Jo and Ellie and ask them out on a date. I'm sure you won't be disappointed. And then you can make an informed decision whether you want to date one, two, or all three of us. She was inspired. I laughed with her and said that the plan was not bad. It turned out to be a very good plan, and I had good dates with each of the women. It wasn't an easy decision for me, but I decided to try Jane as someone worth moving on with. Are you going to keep seeing all three of them? What is it? She asked when I asked her out on a second date. I would understand that, but I was hoping that you would give me a chance to consolidate my relationship with you first. Is it too explicit? I know that if I don't ask, Mary Jo will. Not too much, I assured her. On the next date, we had a lovemaking session. We made love half the night. Yes, none of us are 25, but experience and emotions give a lot. Blandness wins, she whispered to me a few minutes later. Jen and I dated for 6 months before I asked her to marry me. I never asked her if she still had a friendship with Tracy or if they talked about me, because I didn't care. That part of my life was over a long time ago. She was thinking about it, like Min Mum, because when she stopped crying after I asked her to marry me, she said she would never play Tracy. One man, one woman. That's the only way. It may be bland for some, but it's perfect for me, she said. The relationship between Tracy and Jen ended a few months after Tracy found out that her best friend was dating her ex-husband. You stole my husband from me? Tracy accused Jen as she relayed this conversation. No, I didn't, but you refused him. He divorced you, Jen replied. Now you have Neville. Oh, yes, Tracy said softly. Tracy and Neville never got married, so they didn't have to divorce when, a few years later, as I found out, he left her and their young son. As my children told me, Tracy turned into a bitch, pointing out to Neville that she did not like raising a child at a time in her life when she should have enjoyed past achievements and grandchildren. Apparently, his willingness to take on everything in the bedroom had exhausted itself, and they did not agree on many aspects of their home life. One day, as my daughter told me, when she came home from work, she found a farewell note on the kitchen table. Shit happens, I replied blankly.